Our final speaker for the day is George Smith.
My feet were swinging back and forth as they hung from the exam table. I was at my annual physical getting a form that was needed for me to participate on my high school athletic teams. This sounded simple: get the form and I'd be on my way. After quite some time, my pediatrician had returned, except without that paper. He broke the news to my mom and I that I would need to get an EKG test in order to leave the office that day. I couldn't have looked more cool and calm, but I was confused and my body was racing on the inside. I didn't know what an EKG was, but it didn't sound good to me. And when you go to the doctors, you always seem to anticipate the very worst, and at least that's what I did. I anticipated the very worst. My doctor told me that the EKG was a test that checks your heart for any problems when pumping blood to other parts of your body. Completely harmless, but nonetheless still nerve-wracking. As soon as the doctor left the room, I asked my mom a million questions like she was my own personal WebMD. Of course, she said everything would be fine. She told me that I was very active, so if anything were to be wrong, we've already seen some signs of it. She was always right, and I believe that she was not only supporting me through this stress, but also telling the truth. The EKG test was completed. It could not have gone more poorly. I failed miserably. Something had to be wrong with my heart after this test was run. There couldn't have been that many errors in the EKG. They can usually leave some room for error in an EKG test because accidentally changing a breathing pattern or anything of that sort can disrupt the test results. I kept convincing myself that that was me, that I was the one messing up the test, that I was not keeping the same breathing pattern. My pediatrician reported back to us that I'd have to go see a cardiology specialist. At the time, that sounded very intimidating. So as you may have guessed, I lost my mind on the ride home. I immediately thought of the worst. I didn't want my life to be over. Now, it sounds like I may have been a little overdramatic, but one of the things I love to do, play basketball, would be nearly impossible to continue if I were to be diagnosed with a serious heart condition. A week later, I found myself in the waiting room of another healthcare facility, this time the hospital. There were all these kids waiting that ranged in age from probably 6 months to 9 years old. They're all very calm, and most of them have already been there before for exams and/or operations. You could tell because the families were very familiar with the nurses in the waiting room. You should have seen me, though. Being 15 years old, I was bouncing my leg, sweating through my shirt, and my stomach felt like I was in the middle of a crazy roller coaster drop at a theme park. It didn't help that my parents even looked nervous. That's when I became the most anxious I've ever been, as the clock ticked away in the waiting room. After what felt like 10 days, my name was finally called. I was told that I'd have to go alone for the first exam. So you can probably attest to the anxiety I was feeling now. The one thing in this world that would be able to keep me sane during this first exam were my parents, and they weren't going to be with me. The first exam was an echogram. They used this weird and slimy liquid with some round utensil that was pressed into my chest and upper abdomen. So the supplies they used looked very similar to the ones they use in an ultrasound for a woman who's pregnant. As if this day could have got any worse, the nurse doing the echogram was in training. So you can probably figure out how this went. I felt like I was in there for hours. The lady kept asking questions to the doctor who was observing her while she was in training. He would just nod or not say anything at all. It came to the point where he had to take over the exam, and when he did, I was so relieved. Not only did I know that the test would now move faster and smoother, but I knew that I wasn't going to get stabbed any longer by her with that utensil. She was putting so much force on my stomach and chest that I wanted to throw up. After all this stress I went through, I had to wait another hour in the waiting room while the cardiology specialist analyzed the test results. They were looking to see if I had Marfan syndrome, which is a diagnosis of a heart problem that is usually found in taller and thinner males. It turned out that I didn't have Marfan's, and that the testing and procedures proved that I was fine. The EKG test must have just been a little wonky that day. Nonetheless, my family and I were beyond excited to hear that I was okay. After all the stress I went through, I had to wait another hour while the cardiology specialist analyzed the test results. On that ride home, I'd come to realize several things. Now, I've always had my nose down, most of the time keeping to myself. I haven't really ever stopped to take a deep breath. To be honest, I never took a step back to take a breath at all. When writing this speech, I wanted to tell a story where I had a scare that would completely disrupt my future plans. However, when talking with some people about it, I noticed that there was a better topic to come from this. I had come to see if the scare with my heart gave me the opportunity to pause and reflect. It showed me that I'm taking some major things in life for granted. That ride home from the hospital was where I reflected. I reflected on how lucky I've been. First, my parents. They're not better people in this world than my mom and my dad. They've done everything in their power to help me so that I have the very best future. They sent me to 2 different private schools, knowing these were the institutions that would make me a better person and provide me with endless opportunities. These decisions that were made were heavily influenced by basketball, and this too has always been a huge part of my life. You could even say that my life has been revolving around basketball. And to be completely truthful, there's no one who has been more essential to my growth and progression on the court than my grandfather. He was the one that would drive me and my friends to all the practices every single day since the 4th grade. He'd be the first person in the gym, always parking himself in the center of the court in the first row of the bleachers. He was a basketball junkie at heart, and his love for the game certainly rubbed off on me. So I credit him for getting me to all my early morning and late night practices and games. I also credit him for instilling in me his everlasting passion for the game. He is the reason I started playing basketball. Neither of my parents were hoopsters growing up, so I learned everything from him. Genuinely, I don't think there's one person I can thank enough for where I am today than my grandfather. When I first went to high school as a freshman, it was a transition that hit our relationship pretty hard. He could no longer watch my practices or drive me to my games. It was tough at first, but this change helped me grow up and become more aware of how people and things in life can be taken for granted. After a couple of years playing at my grandfather's alma mater, I made the best decision of my life to transfer to Brooks. In the beginning, this was just a decision solely made for my future in basketball. But as I started to get more acclimated and comfortable with where I was, I instantly thought of that car ride home from the hospital that day. I was so thankful that I was given the opportunity to go to Brooks and be a part of the school. I was very grateful for Coach McVeigh and his help with my growth on and especially off the court. And ultimately, Brooks is where I became independent and mature. I was surrounded by friends and classmates that had the same goals and aspirations for their futures, and that is exactly what I wanted to be around every single day. Besides basketball, I've realized how important it is to build relationships and find other things you love to do. Life is short, and we need to make the most of it. I think nowadays we spend so much time working hard, keeping our heads down, and constantly pushing and grinding for that metaphorical gold medal. We need to take the time to reflect. I think we would all be in a better place if we took the time to recognize how fortunate we truly are. That said, I'm grateful to be here in front of you all today to share this story. And in sharing this story, I hope at least one person can find the time to be thankful and appreciative for what they have and for those that care about them. In this day and age, it seems to me that we as a society are too singularly focused on ourselves and less concerned for one another. I sure as hell am thankful for you guys, along with my parents, my family, my coaches, my teachers, and of course, my friends. And I hope you are too, because this world is a scary place without them. We need to reflect more, take the time to appreciate what we have, think about those we love, reach out to those in need, and be kind to one another. I think our world would be better for it. Thank you.